As pandemic waned and eateries sprung back to life, the old controversy surrounding service charges at restaurants has again come to the fore. After complaints, the Department of Consumer Affairs has warned restaurants across the country against forcibly levying the charge. The government has also called a meeting with Restaurant Association to discuss the contentious issue. In a letter to the National Restaurant Association of India, which represents the interests of 5 lakh plus restaurants, Consumer Affairs Secretary Rohit Kumar Singh pointed out that restaurants have been collecting service charge from consumers by default, even though payment of any such charge is voluntary and at the discretion of consumers and not mandatory as per law. It has scheduled a meeting with NRAI on June 2nd to discuss 4 issues pertaining to service charge levied by eateries, including restaurants making service charge compulsory, adding service charge in the bill in the guise of some other fee or charge, suppressing from consumers that paying service charge is optional and voluntary, and embarrassing consumers in case they resist from paying service charge. The meeting follows the government taking notice of a number of media reports as well as grievances registered by consumers on the National Consumer Helpline. The department's letter points out that consumers are forced to pay service charge, often fixed at arbitrarily high rates by restaurants. They are also being falsely misled on the legality of such charges and harassed by restaurants on making a request to remove such charges from the bill amount. Department of Consumer Affairs has already published guidelines in April 2017 which note that the entry of a customer into a restaurant cannot by itself be construed as consent to pay the service charge. Any restriction on entry on the consumer by way of forcing him to pay the service charge as a condition precedent to placing an order of food and beverages amounts to restrictive trade practice as defined in the Consumer Protection Act. The guidelines mention that placing of an order by a customer amounts to his agreement to pay the prices displayed on the menu card along with the applicable taxes. Charging for anything other than that without the express consent of the consumer would amount to unfair trade practice as defined under the Act.
The Department of Consumer Affairs as such is entrusted with the responsibility to take cognizance of matters which are of public importance. And if they are concerning the consumers at large, then the government will take proactive steps. The government has said, particularly in the guidelines, that the hotel or the restaurant needs to specify that this service charge is voluntary, and second, that it may leave the column pertaining to the service charge completely blank so that the person who has received this service as a matter of gratitude or tip may pay some money to the restaurant for availing this service. I would say some or very few are implementing, but most of the people are sticking to this thing that we will charge a service charge. If it remains a mandatory thing that has to be paid by the person, then the whole purpose behind the 2017 guidelines goes away. Whether it would fall under an unfair trade practice or not is something that is going to be determined by a forum or a commission. You can say the executive of the country is trying to give some directions to the judicial forums to interpret the clause in such a manner. But there is nothing that is mandatory in the guidelines as such. These are merely in the nature of guidelines, not a statute, neither a statute nor a regulation or a rule made by the government which has some sanction attached to it. So these are just, you can say, recommendations from government side.
Needless to say, the restaurant industry has a different view. The NRAI, in a statement yesterday, claimed there was no illegality in levying such a charge, and whether or not to levy a service charge is a matter of individual restaurant policy. It argued that once the customer, who is made aware of such a charge in advance, decides to place the order, it becomes an agreement between the parties and is not an unfair trade practice. GST is also paid on the service charge, the association added. Another industry body, the Federation of Hotel and Restaurant Associations of India, had in 2017 said that while the rights of the consumers are paramount, the rights of individual establishments should not be impinged upon. Are there merits to the industry's arguments?
There are merits to this argument. The agreement remains between the two parties, that is, one is who is providing the service and the other one who is availing the service. And ultimately, it boils down to the freedom to contract or do a private contract and how much the government can interfere into such situations.
The Consumer Affairs Department had in April 27 said that paying service charge or the tip to staff should be left to the discretion of customers and it should not be binding. It is high time that the government sets the record straight on this issue, which has been dragging on for years. The meeting called by the government may be a step in the right direction.
If you liked this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.